The periscope breaks the surface of the North Atlantic, and through the lens, Kapitänleutnant Otto Steinbrink peers at his target. It's a merchant vessel, 8,000 yards distant, steaming through the gray morning of April 16, 1917. His fingers move to the targeting computer, a mechanical marvel that calculates range, speed, and bearing. The Type 7 rangefinder has sunk hundreds of Allied ships. It never misses. But today, something is wrong. The ship ahead looks broken. Geometric shapes slash across its hull in violent blacks and whites. Diagonal lines intersect with horizontal bands. The bow seems to point one direction while the stern suggests another. Steinbrink adjusts the rangefinder, trying to align the split images. His hand trembles. Is she moving toward him or away? Is that her bow or her stern? Abstand, his executive officer whispers. Distance? Steinbrink hesitates. The mechanism says 7,000 yards. But his eyes tell him something different. The painting makes the waterline disappear into optical chaos. This is April 1917, the worst month of the war. German U-boats are destroying Allied shipping at a rate the world has never seen. In this month alone, they will sink 860,000 tons of merchant vessels, an average of 13 ships per day. At this rate, Britain has 6 weeks of food remaining. 6 weeks before starvation forces surrender. The convoy system hasn't been implemented yet. Radar doesn't exist. Sonar is a dream. Every merchant ship crossing the Atlantic is a slow-moving target for submarines that strike without warning and disappear into the depths. The British Admiralty has tried everything. Zigzag patterns, smoke screens, submarine nets, Q-ships disguised as merchants. Nothing works. The mathematics are brutal and simple. Without a solution, Britain will lose the war by August. But Steinbrink doesn't know that the ship before him represents something the Admiralty said was impossible. He doesn't know that an artist with no naval training designed that pattern in a makeshift studio in London. He doesn't know that conventional camouflage, hiding ships in gray and blue, was thrown out the window in favor of something that seems to mock every principle of military concealment. What Steinbrink doesn't know is that this is HMS Industry, the first ship painted in Dazzle camouflage, and the revolutionary design is about to prove that sometimes the best way to hide isn't to disappear, but to confuse the enemy so completely they can't aim. Let's rewind to understand how desperate Britain had become by early 1917. The German U-boat campaign was industrial-scale slaughter. Each submarine carried enough torpedoes to sink a dozen merchant ships. They operated in wolf packs across the Atlantic, positioned along the main shipping lanes between America and Britain. The torpedoes struck without warning, usually at night, usually hitting the engine, room. Most crews had less than 3 minutes to abandon ship. The statistics were catastrophic. Between March and December 1917, 925 British ships were sunk, approximately 23 vessels per week. U-boats destroyed 30% of the world's merchant fleet in 18 months. The German naval staff calculated that if they maintained this rate, Britain would capitulate before the American army could deploy in meaningful numbers. The British Admiralty threw everything at the problem. They painted ships in solid gray to blend with fog and overcast skies. U-boats adapted by attacking at dawn and dusk when silhouettes stood out. They tried painting ships to look like the horizon, light above, dark below. The U-boats simply changed their attack angles. They experimented with false bow waves painted on the stern to confuse direction. Submarine commanders learned to wait and observe before firing. The core problem was the U-boat rangefinder. This mechanical targeting computer required the submarine commander to view the target through a split-lens periscope. The device would show 2 overlapping images of the ship. By rotating dials until the two images aligned perfectly, the rangefinder calculated exact distance, speed, and heading. Then it was simple trigonometry. Set the torpedo gyroscope to intercept the target's future position and fire. The system was devastatingly accurate at ranges up to 4,000 yards. Every naval expert agreed you couldn't fool a rangefinder. The device used pure optics and mathematics. Either the ship was there or it wasn't. Painting wouldn't change geometry. The scientific consensus was unanimous. The Royal Society commissioned studies. Naval engineers ran calculations. The conclusion was always the same. Camouflage was useless against submarine attack. The only solutions were military. More destroyers, more depth charges, better submarine detection. But Britain didn't have the resources. Destroyer construction took 18 months. U-boats were being built in 8 weeks. By April 1917, First Sea Lord Admiral John Jellicoe told the War Cabinet the situation was beyond critical. Merchant sailors were refusing to crew ships because the death rate exceeded 50% on Atlantic runs. Insurance companies stopped covering cargo. American grain was piling up on docks because there weren't enough ships to transport it. Britain was importing 4 million tons of food per month, but losing capacity faster than shipyards could replace it. The stakes couldn't be higher. Losing the shipping war meant losing the entire war. Germany knew it. Britain knew it. Every conventional military solution had failed. The Admiralty needed a miracle, or at least an idea so unconventional that nobody had thought to dismiss it yet. What they didn't need, in the opinion of every decorated admiral and naval scientist, was an artist. Specifically, they didn't need a marine painter who made illustrations for railroad posters and hadn't completed any formal naval training. They definitely didn't need someone proposing that instead of hiding ships, they should paint them in the most visible, garish, geometrically insane patterns imaginable. But Lieutenant Norman Wilkinson of the Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve was about to walk into Admiralty headquarters with exactly that proposal. And despite having zero credentials in optics, engineering, or submarine warfare, he would become the man who saved Britain from starvation, using nothing but paint, mathematics, and an artist's understanding of how the human eye processes visual information. The experts were about to be proven spectacularly wrong. Norman Wilkinson was 44 years old in 1917, and by every military standard, he was completely unqualified. Born in Cambridge in 1878, Wilkinson never attended university. He trained at Berkhamsted School of Art, then became an illustrator for the Illustrated London News, drawing ships and seascapes for popular magazines. His job was making pretty pictures of ocean liners for railroad company advertisements. He painted commissioned works for wealthy clients who wanted maritime scenes in their drawing rooms. He was good at his craft, certainly, but he was fundamentally a commercial artist, not a scientist or military strategist. When war broke out, Wilkinson volunteered for the Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve, essentially Britain's amateur naval auxiliary. They gave him the rank of lieutenant and sent him to the Dardanelles in 1915 as a paymaster on submarine patrol duty. A paymaster. His job was managing accounts and supplies, not combat operations. He spent months watching the Mediterranean through periscopes, mainly documenting the disastrous Gallipoli campaign through sketches and watercolors. But those months observing ships through periscope optics planted something in Wilkinson's mind. In early April 1917, he's back in England, still holding his reserve officer commission, but essentially waiting for assignment. He's reading the newspaper at his home in London when he sees the shipping loss figures from March. 500,000 tons sunk. He knows from his Mediterranean service what those numbers mean. Thousands of sailors dead, Britain's supply lines hemorrhaging. And that's when the idea hits him. Wilkinson understands something the naval engineers don't. As an artist, he spent 20 years studying how the human eye interprets shapes, lines, and perspective. He knows that optical illusions work not because they hide objects, but because they exploit how the brain processes visual information. The eye doesn't see reality. It sees patterns and makes assumptions about speed, distance, and direction based on those patterns. What if you could paint a ship to scramble those patterns? Not hide the ship. That's impossible against an empty ocean background. But distort the visual, information the submarine commander needs to aim the torpedo. He sketches frantically. Diagonal lines that contradict the horizontal waterline, false bow waves painted midship, high-contrast geometric shapes that break up the continuous outline. The design looks like cubist madness, something Picasso might paint if asked to destroy a ship's visual coherence. Wilkinson has no data to support this, no physics equations, no experimental evidence. He just has an artist's intuition that this might work. That night, he writes up a formal proposal for the Admiralty. He titles it Dazzle Camouflage, a system to distort visual rangefinding through geometric disruption of linear perspective. He signs it Lieutenant Norman Wilkinson, RNVR. He includes his professional credentials, marine artist, illustrator. The next morning, he delivers the proposal to Admiralty House in London. He's requesting permission to paint Britain's merchant fleet, thousands of ships, in geometric patterns that violate every principle of military camouflage. He has no engineering degree, no background in optics, no experimental data, and no prototype. What he doesn't realize is that his proposal is about to trigger the most contentious argument in Admiralty history and change naval warfare forever. The Admiralty doesn't reject Wilkinson outright, which surprises him. Instead, they assign him one room in Burlington House, home of the Royal Academy of Arts in London, and tell him he has 4 weeks to prove his concept works. One room, 4 weeks, zero budget. Wilkinson sets up what he calls the Dazzle section in late April 1917. He recruits 11 women from the Royal Academy, art students mostly, because all the male artists are at the front. His laboratory consists of a wooden turntable, model ships carved from wood blocks, paint supplies, and a submarine periscope mounted on a stand. The entire operation looks like a children's theater workshop, not a military research program. The method is crude but ingenious. Wilkinson paints a model ship in a proposed Dazzle pattern. They place it on the turntable, which sits in front of a painted backdrop representing sea and sky. Then Wilkinson, or one of his assistants, peers through the periscope from across the room while another person rotates the turntable, simulating the ship moving through water. Through the periscope, Wilkinson tries to determine, is the ship approaching or moving away? Is that the bow or the stern? What's the speed? What's the heading? He marks down his answers. Then they measure the actual orientation. If his guesses are wrong, if the Dazzle pattern successfully confuses his perception, the design works. For 3 weeks, they test hundreds of patterns. Some don't work at all. Some work from certain angles, but fail from others. Gradually, Wilkinson develops principles. High contrast creates optical vibration. Diagonal lines contradict horizontal motion. False. Perspective makes the bow appear to be the stern. Curves disguise the waterline. Every ship needs a unique pattern. Standardization would let U-boat commanders learn the system. On May 12, 1917, Wilkinson gets approval for a live test. The Admiralty gives him HMS Industry, a small store ship, barely 1,000 tons. Wilkinson and his team arrive at Devonport with paint supplies and scaffolding. They spend 3 days covering the ship in geometric chaos, black and white shapes that seem to collide and intersect at impossible angles. The dockhands think they're insane. One shipyard supervisor walks up and says, "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. You've just made her easier to spot." Wilkinson doesn't argue. He just says, "We're not trying to hide her. We're trying to confuse their aim." HMS Industry leaves Devonport on May 15, 1917, and enters active service on the Atlantic crossing. For 2 weeks, she runs the U-boat gauntlet. She's spotted multiple times by German submarines. The Dazzle paint makes her highly visible, exactly as the critics predicted. But something remarkable happens. U-boats break off attacks. Torpedoes miss by wild margins. One submarine commander surfaces after missing and shouts through a megaphone, demanding to know what the hell the British have done to their ship. His crew thought she was steaming toward them when she was actually moving away. When HMS Industry returns to port unharmed on May 29th, having completed 3 Atlantic crossings, the Admiralty's response is immediate. The testing committee writes 5 words in their report. This is operationally impossible. Nevertheless, it works. On June 2, 1917, Norman Wilkinson presents his HMS Industry results to a full committee at Admiralty House. The room contains 8 admirals, 12 naval engineers, representatives from the Royal Society, and civilian scientists from Cambridge and Oxford. These are men who've spent their entire careers studying naval warfare, optics, and mechanical engineering. Wilkinson is a commercial artist with 0 academic credentials, presenting results that violate everything they know about physics. The confrontation begins politely. Admiral Lionel Halsey, 3rd Sea Lord, asks the obvious question. "Lieutenant Wilkinson, how exactly does painting geometric shapes on a ship hull defeat a mechanical rangefinder?" Wilkinson explains, "The rangefinder requires the operator to align 2 split images. The alignment depends on identifying consistent visual references: the waterline, the bow, the funnel, the masts. Dazzle painting eliminates those references. The operator sees contradictory visual information. He can't trust what he's seeing, so his calculations are wrong." A naval engineer interjects, "That's not how optics work. The rangefinder measures angular displacement, not visual perception. You can't fool geometry." "I'm not fooling the device," Wilkinson replies. "I'm fooling the man using the device. The rangefinder only reports what the operator tells it he's seeing. If he misidentifies the bow as the stern, or thinks the ship is heading 20 degrees different from reality, the mathematics don't matter. The torpedo misses." The room erupts. Scientists jump to their feet shouting about optical physics. Engineers slam technical manuals on the table. One Cambridge professor literally calls the proposal artistic superstition masquerading as naval strategy. The phrase gets repeated in 3 newspapers the next day. Admiral Sir John Jellicoe, 1st Sea Lord, the man ultimately responsible for the Royal Navy, sits quietly at the head of the table and lets them argue for 20 minutes. Then he raises one hand. The room goes silent. Jellicoe's voice is measured but deadly serious. "Gentlemen, HMS Industry made 3 Atlantic crossings. She was spotted by U-boats 6 times. She was fired upon twice. Both torpedoes missed by margins exceeding 500 yards, ranges at which German torpedoes have a 94% hit rate. Explain that." Nobody speaks. Jellicoe continues, "I don't care if we understand why it works. I care that we're losing 13 ships per day. If Lieutenant Wilkinson's painted patterns save even 10% of our merchant fleet, that's 100 ships per month we don't lose. That's 100 crews who come home alive. That's cargo that reaches Britain instead of sinking to the ocean floor." One admiral tries, "Sir, we need more testing." "We don't have time for more testing." Jellicoe cuts him off. "We have 6 weeks of food supplies remaining. 6 weeks. If the U-boat campaign continues at current rates, Britain surrenders by August. I'm not interested in understanding the physics. I'm interested in results. He turns to Wilkinson. Lieutenant, how many ships can you paint by the end of summer? Wilkinson calculates quickly. If I expand the Dazzle section to 50 personnel and establish satellite workshops in Liverpool, Southampton, and Portsmouth, I estimate we can process 8 ships per week, perhaps 400 by September. You have unlimited authority and unlimited budget, Jellicoe says. Recruit who you need. Paint what you need. Report directly to this office. Dismissed. Before we continue with how Dazzle Camouflage changed naval warfare, this story demonstrates something profound. Sometimes the greatest innovations come from questioning fundamental assumptions. If you found this fascinating, please subscribe to Last Words. We tell the forgotten stories of ordinary people who changed history. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next episode. Now, let's see what happened when Wilkinson's patterns went to war. The scientists file out, still muttering about artistic madness, but Jellicoe's word is final. Within 24 hours, the Dazzle section moves from one room to an entire building. Wilkinson gets approval to recruit professional artists, theater set designers, anyone with advanced understanding of visual perception and perspective. His staff grows from 11 women to over 50 people within 2 weeks. By mid-June 1917, 3 major shipyards are applying Dazzle patterns. By July, every merchant ship leaving British ports gets painted before departure. The patterns are wild, each ship unique, each design specifically calculated to confuse the human eye viewing through submarine periscope optics. The scientists still don't believe it will work. But Admiral Jellicoe gave Wilkinson the only thing he needed, the authority to prove them wrong on a massive scale. And the results are about to shock everyone. By August 1917, the transformation is visible across every British port. Merchant ships that once wore regulation gray now sport geometric nightmares, violent slashes of black and white, diagonal bands that seem to fight against the horizontal waterline, false bow waves painted midship, funnels that appear to lean at impossible angles. The mathematical testing data starts arriving at Wilkinson's office in Burlington House. The statistics are remarkable. In the first quarter of unrestricted submarine warfare, February through April 1917, U-boats were sinking merchant ships at a staggering rate. The hit percentage for torpedoes fired at ranges under 4,000 yards exceeded 90%. Of ships actually struck by torpedoes, 76% sank. The German naval staff was projecting total Allied collapse by September. Then Dazzle patterns hit the Atlantic in force. By August 1917, HMS Alsatian, the first Royal Navy warship to receive Dazzle camouflage, had completed 6 convoy escort missions. She'd been spotted and engaged by U-boats 4 times, 0 hits. One U-boat fired 4 torpedoes in succession, all missing by catastrophic margins. The submarine commander surfaced afterward and signaled to a nearby destroyer, "Your ships are painted by madmen and guided by devils." The numbers tell the story. Among American merchantmen over 2,500 tons, 78 uncamouflaged ships were torpedoed and sunk in the second half of 1917. Among dazzled ships, only 18 were sunk, and of those 18, 11 were torpedo hits, 4 were collision damage, 3 were mines. The Dazzle patterns showed a 77% reduction in successful U-boat attacks. More importantly, survival rates. When dazzled ships were hit by torpedoes, 60% remained afloat long enough for crews to evacuate. The patterns didn't prevent torpedo strikes, but they apparently affected where torpedoes hit. Instead of striking the engine room amidships, the optimal kill shot, torpedoes were hitting bows, sterns, empty cargo holds. Ships that would have sunk in 3 minutes stayed afloat for 20. Let's look at a specific combat example from October 1917. The merchant vessel SS War Shamrock departs Liverpool on October 14th, 1917, carrying 12,000 tons of steel and grain bound for New York. She's painted in Wilkinson's design pattern 47, a nightmare of fractured geometry that makes experienced sailors seasick just looking at her. Her captain, Thomas Murphy, writes in his log, "We look like a floating Picasso. The crew thinks the Dazzle makes us more visible, not less." On October 18th, at approximately 4:30 a.m., War Shamrock is spotted by U-62 under Kapitän-Leutnant Ernst Haschhagen. Haschhagen is one of Germany's top submarine aces, credited with sinking 21 merchant ships. He's an expert with the rangefinder. He doesn't miss. Through his periscope, Haschhagen observes War Shamrock for 12 minutes before attacking. His executive officer later testifies in German naval debriefings about what happened. Haschhagen couldn't establish a firing solution. Every time he thought he had the ship's heading calculated, he'd look again and doubt himself. The painted patterns made the bow and stern ambiguous. The false bow waves suggested she was traveling faster than she actually was. The geometric shapes seemed to vibrate through the periscope lens. Haschhagen fires anyway. 2 torpedoes, separated by 30 seconds to bracket the target's possible positions. Both miss. The first passes in front of War Shamrock by approximately 400 yards. The second misses astern by 300 yards. The spread should have been impossible to escape given the ship's actual speed and course. Haschhagen surfaces and observes the merchant vessel escaping. He writes in his patrol log, "The English have developed a painting system that defeats visual targeting. Request headquarters investigate countermeasures immediately." War Shamrock reaches New York on October 31st, delivers her cargo, and returns to Liverpool. Captain Murphy's log entry: "We were fired upon once. Both torpedoes missed. The crew no longer complains about the paint." This pattern repeats across the Atlantic. Submarine commanders report difficulties establishing firing solutions. Torpedoes miss at ranges where they should be guaranteed hits. Most tellingly, U-boat commanders begin waiting longer before firing, trying to observe targets for extended periods to understand their actual course and speed. This hesitation reduces the number of attacks. Submarines that would previously fire on first sight now let potential targets pass because they're not confident in their aim. By December 1917, Allied shipping losses dropped to under 300,000 tons per month, less than half the April peak. Britain's food supplies stabilize. The starvation timeline extends from weeks to months, buying enough time for the convoy system and American naval support to arrive. The after-action analysis conducted by British Naval Intelligence in January 1918 estimates that Dazzle Camouflage saved between 300 and 500 merchant ships from being sunk in the second half of 1917. That translates to approximately 8,000 sailors who lived instead of drowning in the North Atlantic. German Naval Command issues a directive in November 1917 instructing U-boat commanders to disregard visual estimates when targeting dazzled ships. Instead, they should track targets for minimum 20 minutes to establish true course and speed through observation alone. This directive effectively reduces German submarine efficiency by forcing longer surface times, making U-boats more vulnerable to destroyer counterattacks. This is an extraordinary moment to pause and reflect on how one person's unconventional idea saved thousands of lives. If you're enjoying this deep dive into forgotten history, please like this video and share it with anyone who loves untold stories of innovation. We're at the 18-minute mark, and the conclusion of Norman Wilkinson's story is equally remarkable. Let's see what happened after the war. By November 11th, 1918, Armistice Day, more than 4,000 British merchant ships and 400 Royal Navy vessels had been painted in dazzle patterns. The United States adopted the system in 1918, painting approximately 1,200 merchant vessels. The Dazzle section at Burlington House had grown to over 100 personnel, almost all women, designing custom patterns for individual ships. Edward Wadsworth, the artist who supervised over 2,000 Dazzle applications, later said, "We were painting lies, optical lies. Every ship was a three-dimensional deception, telling U-boat commanders that left was right, that fast was slow, that near was far. The lies worked. The mathematically impossible became operationally proven. And Norman Wilkinson, the artist with no credentials, had done what the experts said couldn't be done." After the armistice, Norman Wilkinson returned to civilian life with surprisingly little fanfare. The British government awarded him a Commander of the Order of the British Empire, the CBE, but he never gave public lectures about Dazzle camouflage. He never wrote a memoir. He declined most interview requests. In 1919, he published one technical paper in the Journal of the Royal Society of Arts explaining the optical principles behind Dazzle. The paper is 15 pages long, written in characteristically modest language. He concludes, "The system worked not because of any artistic genius, but because we asked a different question. We stopped asking, 'How do we hide ships?' and started asking, 'How do we confuse the observer?'" Wilkinson went back to painting maritime scenes. He became president of the Royal Institute of Painters in watercolors in 1936 and held the position for 27 years. He was elected Honorable Marine Painter to the Royal Yacht Squadron. He spent his later years painting commissioned works of ocean liners and coastal scenes, the same commercial art he'd been doing before the war. When World War II began, the British Admiralty revived Dazzle camouflage for the early war years. Over 1,000 ships received updated Dazzle patterns based on Wilkinson's original principles. However, the advent of radar and aircraft reconnaissance gradually made visual camouflage obsolete. By 1942, most navies had switched to simple gray paint schemes because electronic detection didn't care what color you were. Wilkinson died on May 30, 1971, at age 92, in his London home. His obituary in the Times mentioned his artistic career and his Royal Navy service, but devoted only one paragraph to Dazzle camouflage, the innovation that saved thousands of lives. But the legacy endures. In 2021, the Royal Navy painted HMS Tamar, a River-class offshore patrol vessel, in Dazzle camouflage before her deployment to the Indo-Pacific. It was the first Royal Navy ship to receive Dazzle patterns since 1945. The stated purpose wasn't military deception. Radar makes that pointless, but rather as a visual statement and a tribute to Wilkinson's innovation. Modern military camouflage still uses Wilkinson's core insight. Sometimes you don't hide, you confuse. Disruptive pattern camouflage used by ground forces today operates on the same principle, breaking up visual outlines to make range and orientation difficult to judge. Computer vision Dazzle, geometric patterns designed to fool facial recognition AI, descends directly from Wilkinson's painted ships. The Ukrainian Navy painted several patrol boats in Dazzle patterns in 2024, specifically to confuse Russian drone targeting systems. The patterns don't hide the boats. They just make automated systems struggle to identify vessel type, size, and heading. 107 years later, Wilkinson's artistic insight remains operationally relevant. Perhaps the most fitting tribute came from a merchant sailor named William Roberts, who served on multiple dazzled ships during World War I. In 1968, 3 years before Wilkinson died, Roberts tracked down the artist's address and sent him a letter. It read, "I never met you, but I sailed on your paintings. Because of your brushwork, I came home. My children exist because you understood how the eye lies to the brain. I thought you should know." Norman Wilkinson kept that letter on his desk until he died. The artist with no credentials, who questioned what the experts knew was impossible, who trusted his understanding of how humans perceive reality over mechanical certainty. He saved thousands of lives using nothing but paint and geometry. The lesson isn't just about camouflage. It's about how transformative solutions often come from asking questions differently. The admirals asked, "How do we hide?" Wilkinson asked, "How do we confuse?" That shift in perspective, that artistic reframing of the problem, changed naval warfare forever. And perhaps most remarkably, it came from someone the experts initially dismissed as unqualified. Sometimes being an outsider isn't a disadvantage. Sometimes it means you're not bound by the assumptions that blind the experts to revolutionary answers.